And everybody thinks that it's so easy to get sick if someone sneezes near you. It's really not. If your terrain in your nose is in perfect condition, then the odds of you getting sick are cut tremendously. And only 1% of the time do we really catch anything through the air. 99% of the time, we give ourselves pathogens by touching our eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. And people don't realize this. This is the missing story that, yeah, you should wash your hands, but there's more to it that could really empower people. The reason we wash our hands is because if you just casually scratch your ear after touching that doorknob that 4,000 other people have touched, that actually travels to the nose. And the nose is where everything colonizes and it latches on. And I don't think people fully understand that.
Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 98. Today we have on the show Joyce Dales. Joyce is the president of Buzz-A-Go-Go and the inventor of Coldbeegone, a homeopathic Manuka honey-based remedy that you swab in your nose to fight a cold, flu, or allergies, and to protect the nasal biome. Joyce, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And, I think this day and age, especially as we're heading into cold and flu season, people want to know how they can build resistance against a virus or a potential illness. And I really love what you're doing with your Coldbeegone products and Allergy-Beegone, because it speaks to the idea of strengthening our internal terrain as opposed to just waiting until you get sick and popping some pills. So can you speak to that concept a little bit? And well, actually, even before we go there, can you just give us a little background as to who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm a mom, first and foremost. That's my primary identifier. And I invented my product because I'm an adoptive mom, and I adopted two little girls from China and Vietnam, and one of my daughters was immunocompromised. She needed emergency open heart surgery during her adoption due to Agent Orange, and that was the first time, or the second time someone in my life was immunocompromised, and that was the moment I decided I don't want to be afraid of every cough and sniffle. 15 years ago, I felt the way that we have all felt in the last 2 years, that every sneeze is a threat to my family's well-being. And I just couldn't exist. I can't exist in that space. That's not sustainable. So being a New Englander and being raised by a grandmother who believed that all natural things are the solution to our problems, I decided to tackle it from that point of view.
Nice. That's really good. Well, to live in that fear-based mentality is not healthy, right? Because we have a mind-body connection going on. And if you're living in fear, it's going to stimulate your sympathetic side of the nervous system, your rev me up, fight or flight side. And when you're stressed out all the time, it compromises your immune. It does the opposite of what we're hoping to do. So, so being a little more proactive and strengthening our systems to handle what comes our way is a really good idea these days. And I'm totally on board with what you're doing. So tell us a little bit more about your products.
So my products are Coldbeegone, which is BEE, like a bumblebee, and Allergy-Beegone. And I have products for adults and kids, although they're all safe for over the age of 1. And basically, it's just a homeopathic infused raw super honey blend, and you swab it in your nose to help deal with active symptoms. If you're actively sick, if you're fighting sniffle, if you start to feel like you're coming down with something, or you're totally fighting a full-blown cold, or to use it to build up your natural terrain. Because by the time we hit midlife, we've destroyed our biome. And people always think of the gut as the seat of your biome. And it is. It's the seat of your immune system, so to speak. But no one ever thinks of the nose as the first line of defense for the immune system, as the gatekeeper. And everybody thinks that it's so easy to get sick if someone sneezes near you. It's really not. If your terrain in your nose is in perfect condition, then the odds of you getting sick are cut tremendously. And only 1% of the time do we really catch anything through the air. 99% of the time, we give ourselves pathogens by touching our eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. And people don't realize this. This is the missing story that, yeah, you should wash your hands, but there's more to it that could really empower people. The reason we wash our hands is because if you just casually scratch your ear after touching that doorknob that 4,000 other people have touched, that actually travels to the nose. And the nose is where everything colonizes and it latches on. And I don't think people fully understand that.
Yeah. Well, if you think back to high school biology, if you wanted to culture something, you put it in a warm, dark, moist environment, and that's where bacteria will grow. It's also a favorable environment for viruses. So, yeah, this makes total sense. And really, almost nobody's talking about the nasal biome. And it is our first line of defense. The reason why we have hairs in our nose is to filter out the junk we're breathing in. But as you said, airborne stuff is not the real threat. It's stuff we come in contact with our hands, isn't it?
Yeah, because if you touch your eye, that mucosal system down through the sinuses travels to the upper adenoid zone, the back of the nose, and that's where we have these receptor cells. And it has to go there because that's where it needs to do its dirty work. So it goes to those receptor cells and it latches on like a counterfeit key, and it sits there dormant for up to 2 weeks. And in my research, I was amazed by this. I'm like, depending on the variety of pathogen, you have like a 2-week phase of dormancy. And at
Wow.
that time, when I was doing my research, I was consulting with a lot of physicians and people and experts in the field. And I was told, 25% of all medical personnel are colonized with MRSA or VRE in their noses and their nasal pharynx. And we deal with that by giving them ampules of alcohol that they can burst in their nose. However, when we do that, sometimes we don't get all of the pathogen and therefore create more antibiotic resistance bacteria because some survived and adapted. And the second component
Right.
is we inadvertently carpet bomb the area and destroy all your beneficial bacteria. And when that happens and you don't have your beneficial bacteria anymore to help your nose trap and prevent, you become more susceptible to illness. So if that was mind blowing
Right.
to me, I'm like, this can't be, well, how come people aren't taught this? That if you use
Yeah.
excessive saline, chemicals, things with sodium benzoates, you're destroying your beneficial bacteria and utterly compromising your nose's ability to trap and prevent.
Absolutely. So would you say that the things like the neti pot, where you do the nasal irrigation with saline, is good or bad?
I personally am a neti pot dropout because it feels like I'm waterboarding myself. So I am not a strong person in that department. I have to admit. It reminds me of when you're 10 years old and your friend dunks you.
If someone doesn't know what we're talking about with a neti pot, it basically looks like a teapot, and you put it up your nose and you pour water in one side, and it runs through your sinuses and out the other. So it's nasal irrigation, and the idea is to flush out the junk. But what you're saying is you may inadvertently flush out some of the beneficial, some of the good guys living in there that help your biome stay healthy. Is that correct?
That's right. And I think that neti pots have their place when you are dealing with prolonged congestion and you need a good clean out, or if your job entails, you're having a lot of pollutants, but it can become excessively sterilizing. It can stun your cilia and it can inadvertently send bacteria higher up into the sinuses, especially if you're a child and it's such a short journey. Inadvertently creating a bacterial sinus infection. So you got to be a really well-versed neti pot user, somebody who's talented at it and fully understands the process.
All right. So it requires training. It's not just something you can pick up at the drugstore and start
Do your
using.
research, because neti pot is not something to just casually do. Like there are people who give themselves terrible infections with using tap water, and there's a science to it.
Yeah. Tap water loaded with chlorine kills bacteria. Yeah,
Yep.
and among other things, fluoride, a lot of stuff in tap water. That's really a discussion for another day. But today we're talking about strengthening our internal terrain. So getting back to my original question, there's a debate going on between germ theory and what Antoine Béchamp would advocate is strengthening the internal terrain. So in other words, it's not so much the germs that we should be concerned about. It's, are we a favorable environment for those germs and those bacteria and viruses to proliferate? Because we want our bodies to be a hostile environment for them. We want, when they show up, our bodies go to work and destroy them in a relatively short period of time, and they don't become bothersome. But when we are compromised, they have an opportunity to take hold. For instance, with the coronavirus, one person gets it and they have mild symptoms, a little scratchy throat, a little runny nose for a few days, and they're over it. It's like a light cold. And another person ends up in pneumonia and hospitalized and on a ventilator and maybe even die from it. They both got the same virus, but one person, it was fatal, and the other person, it was mild. The difference is the terrain. That the person who was immunocompromised is the one that's going to have a problem. So I would suggest that most of what we've heard from our government and our health agencies these days is misguided. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay home, stay safe, isolate yourself, shut down the schools. That's doing nothing to cooperate with our body's natural design. And it's my contention that we maximize our health potential when we align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. And this is an area of taking care of the body, that holy temple that we live in a way that really can enhance your ability to resist whatever infection comes our way. So anyway, I know I got a little bit of a rant there, but
No, I love it.
do you have anything to add to that, Joyce?
I do. I think it's really interesting. I have so many thoughts about that. I think that the terrain theory is brilliant, and the way that we get, like you said, some people get severely ill and some people don't. That to me is proof that the terrain theory is spot on. That's the evidence. That's the proof of it. I
Yes.
like to think, for a long time I've been thinking about this, and sometimes Coldbeegone, my products will work on me, and sometimes it's not as effective. It depends on my status on any given day. The other component is that when I use it, how far has colonization gotten? And that dormancy phase, when do I strike in the process of dormancy or colonization? That can also impact whether or not the pathogens just hit you here or get down to your lungs. So there's all these different moments in time when we can impact the process and maybe have a better outcome. And the other thing that what you said popped into my head, I have this theory that we were not designed to be in an environment. We're supposed to go to Market Square Day and have like 200, 400 people in our biome, so to speak, in our weekly biome. Right. And we excessively challenge that. We have gone outside of the parameters of what is natural to us by going to an airport and touching a doorknob that 10,000 other people have touched in that week and it has not been cleaned. So since we have to live in this global environment and we are going outside of how we were designed and what our biome can handle, we have to do everything we can to get back to homeostasis and to protect ourselves. You need to have a myriad of things in your arsenal to protect yourself, because our terrain is already being bombarded by pollutants and assaults, and never mind the unnatural globalization of our exposure to pathogens. All of those things, I think, play into, that's what, when you spoke, that's exactly where my head went.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. For somebody that spent 35 years in airliners and in and around airports, I can relate to what you're saying. I used to get sick pretty frequently. I'm retired now, but, I would get exposed to a lot running through airports every time I went to work. Spent 35 years as an airline pilot. And, but, when I started implementing these natural and holistic principles and strengthening my internal terrain, my frequency of cold or flu dropped off the cliff. I mean, I hardly get sick anymore. Wouldn't say I never get sick, but when I do, it's mild. And I did it by implementing these types of principles. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I thought this was a great way of looking at it. If you take an animal in the wild and you put them in a zoo, they're not in a natural environment anymore, and they become less healthy. They may not even be able to procreate. They're just not as healthy as they are in their natural environment. Well, we are designed to make contact with the earth, be outdoors, get outdoor air, fresh air, sunlight on our skin, be in sync with the diurnal rhythms of the planet. All those things, work in the garden outside, walk on a daily basis. We're designed to do all that, but we're essentially living in human zoos the way we live in office buildings and even in our homes, with our windows shut and our artificial heating and air conditioning and all kinds of pollutants accumulating in our homes from carpet and paint and you name it. So we're essentially, we're living in a zoo, and we've got to do our best to minimize that environment and get back to the way things are supposed to be. And that way we'll strengthen our internal terrain. So I just love your message. It's a great message.
Well, thank you. And there's another component to that as well that you just made me think of. I find it really troubling as a teacher and as a young mom when everybody's like, oh, my kid's sick all the time. They're sick every 2 weeks. It builds their immune system. No, that's a big fat lie that your child has to have a cold every month of its life. Your child builds its immune system by micro exposure and then his healthy terrain dealing with it. If he's constantly
Amen.
fighting a virus off, how do they build terrain? And constantly fighting a virus off to a lot of parents equals trips to the doctor, more exposure, antibiotics. My children, when we're at the lake, I will be like, don't shower for 3 days. Get it all. Just lick the rocks. Go for it, guys. But when we travel or when we're in Florida and we're exposed on swim team and there's so much more exposure, then I'm careful about human germs, not natural germs. So I think that it's a mistake for people to think you can ever get ahead of the evolution of human viruses. You can't catch all of them. You will never have that perfect immune system. All you can do is mitigate. You are healthier by being healthy, not the other way around. You can't build health by constantly battling exposure. That's exhausting.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in other words, what you're saying
I
is
rail against that message.
Our systems should be able to fight off these viruses or bacteria on a micro basis, and we don't even know it. It just goes on behind the scenes. We don't have symptoms. Our bodies are just working the way they're supposed to work. They fight that stuff off. We can't, as you said, that was a great thing you just said, was you can't possibly protect yourself from every germ. I'm not against hand washing. Prudent hand washing is a good idea. But the thinking that washing your hands 12 times a day is going to protect you from illness is kind of foolish. It really is, because we get exposed to millions or maybe even billions of bacteria and viruses on a daily basis. Parasites, our bodies are constantly fighting them off behind the scenes. And that's where our bodies can learn that, go from the innate immunity to the learned immunity and say, hey, I recognize that virus. I've seen it before. No problem. Got this covered. And it goes on behind the scenes and you don't even know what's going on. It's a wonderful thing. Our bodies are amazing.
You don't need to have a sterile home. Our rule is that if it came from the outside world, it is cleaned. It doesn't come into my home, but my home is not pristine. We drop keys at the door. We wash hands. We spray phones with Everclear, non-hormone disrupting Everclear 151. Spritz, spritz, spritz. Wash hands. And then I don't care how, obviously I clean. It's not a dust bowl in here, but I don't excessively clean my home. Clorox does not touch this property. I want my biome. They're selling, what they're selling now? And honestly, it's kind of genius. So I'm not knocking this entrepreneur, but they're selling these systems now that gently mist your environment with probiotics. Shouldn't have to do that.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Take your shoes off at the
That's not
door.
the natural way to get them.
Yeah. If you've been at school all day, go change your clothes or take a quick shower. Sure. But I let my home biome be my nest of natural, what is natural to my family and the germs that we share. And that's natural. That's our environment.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So I want to ask you a couple questions about your product. So it's Manuka honey and homeopathics, infused with homeopathics. So just as a brief little background, let me give the Natural Nation a little background here. Homeopathic remedies are FDA approved, and they're considered pharmaceuticals, but they are at such low dose, and actually they are energetic remedies, that they are non-toxic. You can give them to babies. It's not you cannot overdose on a homeopathic, but they are very effective if you use them properly. So tell me a little bit about the formulation of your product and just how it works, how effective it is, and those types of things.
Well, I use a proprietary blend of super honeys because I know everything under the sun there is to know about super honeys. And super honeys are honeys from around the globe, and I'm sure we have some in the US, I'm always on the hunt, that have some extraordinary property that science cannot replicate. And Manuka honey, I disclose that one because people understand that one's special. It's hit the mainstream. The cat's out of the bag on that one. So Manuka honey is very special in that it can reverse antibiotic resistant bacteria. So for instance, if you had a wound on your arm and you were systemically sick, you were septic, this is the colonization site, just like your nose. And when the wound, they're now infusing military bandages, alginate bandages with Manuka honey. When it is applied to the colonization site, suddenly the pathogen can no longer create a biofilm to protect itself, and all of a sudden antibiotics will work again if they're necessary, or your own body can get ahead of it. So suddenly at the colonization site, all of a sudden that pathogen is rendered helpless and it can no longer proliferate with the shell, the biofilm around it.
The biofilm.
So that's fascinating to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
Fascinating. I have never heard that before. So honey has that property naturally.
Well, but not all honey has UPF. All honey has a unique peroxide activity. So that means if you apply it to a boo-boo, like I had a terrible little cat scratch here, so I put it on there, local raw honey, perfect. All honey also has yeast and molds. So if you are in a healing process where you're sensitive to those things, be aware. No one under the age of 1 should have it, because honey naturally contains botulism and other pathogens from the bees. But yeah, all honey is medicinal to some extent, but we're not allowed to say that in the United States. Honey is not medicine. It's the most ancient medicine there is. It's the medicine we were given. And when something has UPF, once you eat it, it's neutralized. But these super honeys, many of them can survive the whole journey. I like to joke, I don't mean to crass, from the rooter to the tutor. The whole journey, it maintains its medicinal activity. So the methyl glyoxal, they finally isolated why Manuka honey is special, and they have a rating system for it. And I used to get on the phone with the father of Manuka honey for about a year before he died, almost 2 years. And he taught me everything there is to know. And I trust him, and he helped me source my honey. There's a lot of corruption in the honey world, but I really trust my honey. So Manuka honey has this product called methyl glyoxal, and science has attempted to replicate it by adding methyl glyoxal to ordinary raw honey, but of course they failed, because there is magic in the bees' saliva and their enzymatic activity that cannot be replicated. So
in
Manuka
God's
honey
design.
Right. Stop monkeying with what's already good.
Right. Can't improve upon perfection.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So there's other super honeys around the world, but they don't know they do the same thing with regards to being antimicrobial, not just antibacterial, but microbial, which is viruses, everything. And, but they haven't isolated why, like Scottish Highland heather honey. If you can get your hands on a jar of the darkest Scottish Highland heather honey, it's outperforming Manuka in some instances. There's honeys in Brazil that Japan has been studying that fight cancer, small cell lung cancer. There's honeys in the Pacific Rim that reverse hormone disruptions for perimenopausal women and men. So there's so much out there that we don't know. And that's why I just wanted to keep my remedy simple and not adulterate it. Because when you go to the store and you see something is honey based, and it's a marketing ploy, it's been changed or adulterated in some way that renders that honey useless. And I find that that's probably because of our own FDA regulatory systems forcing people to have to, in order to be profitable, do these things. But I tried to keep mine as simple as I could.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, well, I say the same thing with food, and the more man gets his hands on our food supply, the less healthy it is for us, right? So we should be eating food as close to its God-given natural design as we can. Some processing is absolutely necessary, but we want to keep that to a minimum. And I think that, since honey is food, the same thing applies here. It's close to its natural form, minimally processed, and keeping as much of those natural properties intact. And yeah, it's well known. For instance, propolis. Propolis spray is an excellent for the nasal biome and throat infections. And and we all know that when you get a cold, the first thing you get is a scratchy throat, right? And that's where the thing starts to proliferate. And that's as you said, our nasal passages are the initial line of defense. So this is something worth thinking about. This is something worth exploring. So do you recommend that people use your products prophylactically or as a preventative, or should they only do it once they start, suspect they have an exposure?
All of the above. Because that was the thing that was missing when I was on my search for something to protect my family. I I love vitamin C and zinc and elderberry, but that's once, that's our only preventative options. And then other cold medicines that do something about active symptoms come with a huge risk of side effects, especially if they're traditional OTC meds. So I wanted something that could do both. I like to say use Coldbeegone 3 times a day if you're actively fighting an illness, especially if your nose is running. And then when it comes to just the regular cold and flu season and you want to build your biome up, 1 to 3 times a week before bed. And it's a tiny amount. It's like the size of an O on a keyboard, like we do toothpaste for our toddlers. That tiny little bit is all it takes, because you don't want to weigh your cilia down. You want to allow it to get in there, feed and replenish your bugs, restore your pH and get your moisture right, potentially deal with anything that's latched on attempting to colonize. I make no curative claims, but I like to say use it like 1 to 3 times a week. Like when my kids are at swim team and I know there's a flu going around, we'll preemptively strike 3 times a week just to make sure there's nothing latched on. Because remember, that dormancy phase can be up to 2 weeks long that you have.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was not aware of that they can reside there for that long before they pose a problem. That's pretty amazing.
Generally, it's 5 days. For the average human, it's 5 days.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. So if you wanted to sum up what we talked about today, what would be the low-hanging fruit or the most important thing that you'd like the listeners to take with them from this episode?
That your nose is a biome and it's your first line of defense. And you can really do something about how often and how severe you get sick. We should all be dieting. We should all be exercising. We should all be building our terrain. But here's something that can make you feel empowered today, right now, because it takes months to get all of those other things in alignment. And you really, if you pay attention to your nasal biome, then you can really impact how often you get sick and how often your family gets sick.
Yeah, very good. There's one more thing I just want to remind the Natural Nation is that you said earlier is that honey can prevent the bacteria from forming the biofilm. And the biofilm, in case you don't know, is a way the bacteria defend themselves. So they know they're under attack from your immune system. So they develop this biofilm that's kind of like a cocoon that they live in. And it's a shield from your defenses, from your immune system. So if you can prevent that biofilm from forming, getting rid of that virus or bacteria is going to be a lot easier task. So I think that's a huge point. I really think that's a massive point. I can see you've done your homework on this. Is there anything else about the nasal biome that people may not be aware of?
Don't shove just anything up there. People, a lot of people in the natural community, especially in the last 2 years out of fear, I've been reading apple cider vinegar. And from some of my heroes, I've been reading things like apple cider vinegar and colloidal silver straight up the nose. And just be conscientious of, if you are trying to protect yourself in the moment, do whatever you feel is right. But be conscientious of not destroying the terrain, not carpet bombing the area in an attempt to achieve wellness, because there's so much beneficial bacteria and pH, and your nasal mucosa cannot function. So you don't want to increase your risk in trying to deal with an immediate threat. Do you know what I mean?
There you go. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Don't overkill. What we want to do is come alongside our body's natural processes and encourage those processes, not commandeer our system the way pharmaceuticals do. Right? Pharmaceuticals, they take over your system. They shut down normal biological processes. They commandeer and take control. That's not really the best approach. The best approach is to come alongside our body's natural processes and encourage them, get the obstacles out of the way, and encourage our bodies to do what they already know how to do. We don't have to teach our cells how to do their jobs. They know what we've got to do. Our jobs are to get the obstacles out of the way and just sit back and let these magnificent machines that we live in, these bodies, do their thing, and they will take care of us.
We were designed perfectly. So why are we going to such great lengths? I mean, medicine has its place, but I like to think of what would happen naturally. I'm pretty sure in nature, early man would have or had their honey on their hands and picked their nose. Like that could have happened naturally. I don't know that they would have forced water up into their high sinuses. I don't think that would have happened.
Yeah. It's kind of like, how did they figure this stuff out to begin with? How did they first learn what herbs, or how does elderberry help a virus and help fight a cold? People figured this out early on. I don't know how they did it, but it's amazing the bounty that's available to us in nature.
That's right. Speaking of terrain, this little puppy behind me is rolling and rolling and rolling because she was cleaned. She was given a bath and she knows that is wrong for her. So she is trying to find a patch of dirt to roll in. She wants to go restore her little biome desperately.
Yeah. On her skin. Yeah. That's true. Animals are brilliant. I mean, they just have an amazing ability to sense what they need. And I think what I've studied about herbology is that is how they figured out what herbs were medicinal. When an animal got sick, it'd go out and wander around and find a certain leaf and eat it. And that it wouldn't ordinarily eat. They're like, maybe that has some medicinal value. Let's check that out. And that's how the study of herbal medicine first started, was they watched animals, which is pretty cool. All right, Joyce, it's been a pleasure talking with you. If someone wants to get a hold of some of your products or go deeper with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you or get your stuff?
You can reach me at my website, which is buzzagogo.com or coldbeegone with 2 E's.com. You can reach out to me at joyce@buzzagogo.com or any of my social media. I answer all my emails personally. I get a lot from moms with little ones with their first sniffles. I love to help with that. So reach out to me anytime.
All right. Joyce, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/98. There you can find an audio as well as a video version of the podcast. I also put a full transcript that's downloadable for free. And I always have some type of a content upgrade to help you go deeper with that subject. If you're enjoying the podcast, I sure would appreciate you telling a friend about it. This information is pretty hard to come by. And if you have a like-minded friend, I believe they would appreciate you telling them about the show. Tell them how much you enjoy it and that you think they would enjoy it as well. I'll bet they'll thank you for it. That's all for now. As always, thank you for listening, and I'll talk with you next week. Be blessed.